Hey guys, welcome back to Truth and Fantasy. This week's episode is going to be on a topic that I think a lot of us can relate to. And I didn't really realize it was going in this direction when I picked the submission, but I feel like the overall kind of overarching theme of what we're going to be talking today is people pleasing. Hayley, who is the um, submission for today that we'll get into, she talks about how she really struggles with making decisions for herself, like acting from her own desires and moving in a way that feels good to her because she's afraid that it's not what her parents want for her. And she talks about how that's not necessarily the truth. It's more of this internal process, this internal dialogue of not wanting to kind of shake the boat and, I don't know, force people to maybe be a little bit uncomfortable with your decisions, whether or not that's a reality or not. But I realized that that kind of falls into this overarching theme of people pleasing. And people pleasing, I think, is something a lot of my listeners and viewers and followers have expressed to me over the years that they really struggle with people pleasing and beginning to develop their own sense of self and security within making their own decisions. So we're going to talk about that today. And then we're also going to talk about kind of detaching from your parents and how hard it is in your early 20s, if you do have a positive relationship with your parents, to kind of start not necessarily undoing that, but just allowing yourself to be more independent and, again, act from your own desires and everything. So let's just get into the interview. This is Hayley. Do you want to just go ahead and restate what you submitted?
Yeah, basically, I had an incredible childhood, but from that stems anxiety and fears about pleasing my parents and making them happy, even if what I'm doing to make them happy doesn't make me happy.
Right. Yeah, and I wanted to talk about this one today just because I feel like, um, first of all, I feel like it's going to be like an overarching theme in a lot of the podcast, since I really like to go back to childhood and kind of see how our parents' own like belief systems and our relationships with them affect how we now like interact
Yeah.
in our adult life. So yeah, I just feel like this can be relevant in a lot of different scenarios, just how our relationship with our parents comes into play in our like emerging, blossoming adult lives. So how does this affect your external experience now, like as an adult?
It affects it in so many different ways, like
Yeah.
even if you wouldn't expect it to, like there's always a thought in your mind of like, is this fulfilling everyone around me? Or is this being selfish? Um, Specifically, like for me, college is finishing soon and I travel, but in my head, I think the best option for the people around me would be if I was to go to uni, get a job, and all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So kind of like that people pleasing mentality also is present. Interesting. What are like the specific thoughts and feelings that kind of come along with this experience and how that plays out externally?
Feeling very stagnant. You kind of fall into the same patterns since you know that they're not harming anyone. So kind of get stuck in a routine. There's a lot of fear and anxiety around the experiences that you've attached this mindset to.
Yeah.
Like, say, like, and stuff like that. Um, and also a fear of change.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of want everything to stay the same, even if you're not happy within that
Right.
space.
Yeah. So interesting. And like in the midst of all of those thoughts and feelings present, do you feel like there's one like core point of it all that it all kind of stems down to, or not really?
Definitely the fear of change more than anything.
Interesting.
I'd say
Okay.
you can't, or me specifically, thinking that the change is going to make people sad. Maybe they don't want the same change as I do, kind of thing.
Is that something you experienced at all, like growing up in your childhood with your parents, of like change not necessarily being accepted?
Not really.
Okay.
It's my brain telling me that that's how they think.
Yeah.
Way it's really weird and hard to kind of navigate, since if you ask them what they want, their answer will be for you to be happy.
Right. But, so it's more of an internal situation. Okay, gotcha. Is there any like specific guidance that you feel like, or advice within navigating this that you feel like would help you?
Well, I think you're always going to want your parents to be happy. Yeah. I think say that, but I think being able to separate yourself from the belief, like make the decisions that best fulfill you,
right?
And not feeling guilty about like what you want. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's especially challenging at this age of like early 20s, like just coming out of childhood and just starting to like build your individual life and self, because it's like the first time you're having to do that without, I don't know, thinking about other perceptions, and you're able to actually live in the way that you want to instead of your parents have kind of like led you to. So it makes sense that this work is kind of coming up for you right now, and I'm sure it is for a lot of people. But is this an experience that you feel alone in your day-to-day life?
Definitely, yeah. I just feel like everyone can do whatever they want, which is not the case, but I feel like they're all out having fun, and I'm at home with my cat. Yeah, especially when you talk to people and they're like, I can't wait to get away from my parents, can't wait to go to uni and whatever.
Right.
I guess it's quite hard to talk about because there's a lot of people don't want to say, oh, I don't want my parents to be sad, but quite alienating, I guess.
Right, and there are some people that maybe don't have that quality of like people pleasing, and they are more so okay with just like taking action and doing what they want, but a lot of us can feel stuck within that cycle. Yeah. All right, well, is there anything else you want to add at all, or do you think that covers it?
That covers it.
Right, yeah. Well, thank you for talking to me today. Okay, so I want to start by talking about people-pleasing here, because like I said, I think that's kind of, I don't know if you were picking up on that just by listening to what Hayley had to say. I think that's kind of the overarching theme, especially because it is this kind of internal dialogue mindset of, okay, I realize that maybe the reality isn't that my parents or the people around me are going to care if I make this shift, but for some reason I have this perception going on that's kind of locking me in place and almost forcing me to be stagnant because I feel like they are perceiving me in this certain way. So it's just this kind of mind game in a way. But yeah, so let's talk about people-pleasing. And where does the need to people-please come from? You guessed it, I'm gonna say it stems from childhood. I follow this really fabulous therapist on Instagram. I love therapist Instagrams. Her name is Notes from Your Therapist, I believe, or that's her Instagram handle. And she talks a lot about people-pleasing and how oftentimes in our childhoods, in our family systems, we had to become very, very attuned to the needs of our parents. And these are kind of, once again, as I've talked about before, invisible forces that exist within us. Just since they were ingrained, these kind of systems and ways of showing up in the world started so early on, and they've been ingrained so heavily within us, they become invisible. So one of the ways we tended to the needs of our parents, whether it be emotionally or whatever the case, we begin to abandon our own needs, and we forget how to listen to ourselves and what we need to feel comfortable in the moment, and we start to develop our kind of like meter of comfortability, or I guess a better way to say it is we gauge how comfortable we are by how comfortable we can make everyone else feel, if hopefully that makes sense. So there's this piece of self-abandonment within it, and sometimes we had to abandon ourselves to survive in childhood. We had to kind of simmer down our own emotional reactions so we didn't upset a parent figure. If our parents were a little bit potentially emotionally unstable, maybe we had to kind of keep all of our emotions inside of us and act as a form of comfort to our parents. And again, this can show up in more invisible ways. Like, I think a lot of the time when you're looking back on your childhood, it's hard to pick up on these things, and it's hard to really see into, like, oh, I did have to abandon myself in these moments. I wasn't able to fully express myself emotionally or go to the depths of what I needed, and allow those needs to be met. And again, like I always say, this isn't like to blame your parents. Like, they were human. I'm sure they were doing the best that they could, but this is just something that happens within childhood for a lot of us. So when we get so comfortable abandoning the self in order to survive, and maintain peace, it becomes nearly impossible to remember how to actually access the self. And I think there's various extremes with this, of course, just like anything else. Like, perhaps it's the sort of thing where, like, you don't even know what you want, and your entire kind of compass comes from the outside and what other people want from you. There's that form of self-abandonment, but there can also be the form of self-abandonment, kind of like what Hayley's describing, in knowing what you want. Like, she wants to travel after she graduates, but she feels like she isn't able to actually act on that, and abandons herself in that way because she's not following through with what her inner compass is kind of leading her towards. And it's probably going to feel really uncomfortable for her to act in a new way, to follow through with her desires, to kind of make those shifts. It's going to kind of feel like working a new muscle, like flexing a new muscle, which I'll get into a little bit later. But I also wanted to touch back on the point of like creating this more like stable environment. She speaks on like not wanting to create change, or even if she is craving change, she's scared that change is not going to be a change that her parents want. And once again, I would redirect back to childhood in that I'm not placing this perception on Hayley and her situation at all, but I think a lot of the times when we say we had a good childhood and it was really like stable and peaceful and supportive, that might be true, but there's also a dimension to that, where you have to ask yourself, well, was it stable and peaceful because emotions and like change or things that kind of came in to like rock the boat a little bit, those things maybe weren't accepted? I think that's just something to question, and I think that's a way the people-pleasing mentality can kind of be ingrained within us. If within our family system, peace and order were like the top priority, which is, I think there's a healthy way. Of course, peace and order are good, qualities to exist within a family, of course. But if it's like that's the only way the family system can like tolerate being together as a unit, like if there's no space for the unknown, or for big emotions, or for anger, that sort of thing. If we look back in our childhood and we can only remember peace and order, I would say there is definitely some sort of hint towards why you exist within this kind of people-pleasing space, because humans aren't always peaceful, you know? Humans are messy and chaotic sometimes, and I think a lot of the time when that like really stable environment is like the only thing that's tolerated, we then just become afraid to like make any sort of move in our lives, if that makes sense. I feel like I didn't say that super eloquently, but hopefully, that landed somewhere within you. Okay, now I'm gonna try and explain this other thought and concept that came to me while just pondering on people pleasing. And I feel like this might be kind of complex to explain, but again, hopefully it kind of lands within you. I'm thinking about how the need to protect other people's feelings and like this mentality of assuming that we know what other people want from us, that it's an illusion that it's coming from the external, like that is just another part of ourselves. That's a part of our own psyche. The, assumption of like, oh, they don't want this from me. It's actually just a part of your psyche closing in and protecting you from being able to act on your own needs, if that makes sense. So I think it's really important to get to know that part of your psyche, because like I just said, it's trying to protect you from something. And maybe there's some association within your mind of shaking things up, making a change, moving in a new way, doing something big that you want to do, and, receiving some sort of, like bad reaction or bad experience because of that. So now there's a part of your psyche that like wants to close in and protect that part of you that has a need to take a leap of faith. So it's kind of like the conversation between those two parts. And when you think about it as a purely internal experience of, your own psyche and not actually something that's going on around you, I think that can actually be kind of freeing in a sense, because it's like, oh, I do have control over this. It's going to take time and patience, of course, and it's not going to be like this overnight thing where I suddenly see that it's just a part of my psyche trying to protect another part of my psyche, and now I'm like good to go. It's going to take a while to undo that, which is going to be a series of taking action and then talking to these two parts again and then taking action, sort of a thing. But I think there is some sort of freedom that comes with that, because it's like, okay, these perceived blocks that exist from the external are not real. It's just something inside of me, and I have the agency to put in the effort and patience to untangle these two parts. So that's something to think about, if that landed within you somewhere, hopefully. Oftentimes when these parts, these kind of like protective characters within the self come up, we get really frustrated. And I think of anxiety as one of these protective parts within the self as well, because it's trying to tell you, no, it's not safe. At one point in your life, that part served you. Probably in your childhood, you had to develop this part of the psyche in order to regulate your emotional experience, because children don't regulate emotions in the same way that adults do. So that's where the kind of undoing piece comes in. But just remember, like, this is a broken and unsure part of you. And that's why it's there. Like, that's why it needs this protector, kind of. So don't attack it and push it away and wish it wasn't there and try to fix it. Just kind of like invite it back in and create a warm and open space for it to kind of be reintegrated within the self. And again, just remind yourself like I was saying earlier, it's this illusion. It's not the truth of the situation. The truth of the situation is the people around you, especially if they are your parents and you have a solid, healthy relationship with your parents, they probably do want the best for you. And that, like, it's literally just this protector within you. And keep reminding yourself, it's not the truth. It's not the truth. Yes, I hear you. I see you. Thank you for trying to protect me in this moment, but you're actually not serving me anymore. I'm going to move in a way that serves the truth in this moment. So going back to what I was speaking on before, in terms of this kind of being like a muscle, that's how I see coming out of people pleasing and starting to develop your own sense of self. It's like flexing a muscle that you aren't used to flexing. And at first, it's going to be really hard and maybe painful. You might feel a little bit sore, just because it's new, like you haven't done this before. And eventually, it's going to become easier and easier over time, and you'll become stronger and stronger over time, and you won't even really think about it anymore. So, yeah, like I said, that's how I like to think about people-pleasing and developing your own sense of self, because at first, it's like you aren't even going to know what your sense of self necessarily is. If you're just so used to looking to the external for guidance, it's like, where do you even go inside of you? But you can always find this one little spark within you, and it might feel really quiet and really hard to grasp at first, but it will be there, I promise you. I used to be very much so a people pleaser myself. And I think taking a lot of alone time and kind of isolating yourself in a good way can help within this, and just starting to really listen in on your own voice, and getting to know what that voice sounds like, the true voice inside of you. Who is that? What does she want? And the more you listen in, the more you practice doing that, just like I was saying, the easier it's going to get. So that's my little analogy when it comes to people pleasing. Then finally, I want to talk about detaching from your parents. And by detaching, I don't mean like anything dramatic or like ending your relationship with them or anything like that, but just starting to become a bit more independent. And I think with this, I think there's kind of like two ways to go with it. Like, you can either kind of take it in baby steps and just kind of start slowly, again, flexing that muscle of acting from a place that you want to act from, and continue to communicate with your parents and say, hey, this is why I'm making this decision, and this is why this feels good for me. It doesn't need to be this like reckless thing, just because maybe it's not what they want for you or what you think would be best for them. It doesn't mean that like your relationship can't remain intact. And then I think you can also kind of do it in a more dramatic way of, even like what Hayley was talking about, maybe just making a big decision of like, I'm gonna go travel after I graduate. That's a very independent and freeing choice to make that kind of just like throws you out there on your own in a way. And I think that like, I don't know, that's a bold way to do it, and you just kind of have to like figure it out from there. And most importantly, just like always look at your relationship with your parents as a blessing if you do have a relationship, a good relationship with your parents, because a lot of people don't. And if you're even like questioning, it's almost a blessing to even be thinking like, how is this gonna affect my relationship with my parents? Like, is this gonna make them upset with me, whatever? Is this gonna cause some sort of disagreement? Because a lot of people just don't even have that sense of support within their lives. So I think that's just another like way to kind of reframe it and put it in a more like grateful, positive mindset, which I don't know. I typically don't like to preach from that sort of mindset, but I think in this case it is kind of the truth. And I think typically our parents, I think we kind of underestimate them. And at the end of the day, they just want the best for us. And if you're able to come to them and communicate why this choice that you're making feels like a good choice for you in a really mature and grounded way, they're probably gonna be okay with that. Even if they don't agree with you, even if that's not what they want for you, if you have a good relationship with them, that should be the case. And obviously, like Hayley was saying, like that doesn't make this mindset of people pleasing just magically go away, but I think it's important to remember at the end of the day. And on the other end of that, it's important to remember that people aren't always gonna agree with you, and sometimes disagreements and arguments and chaos is present within relationships. That includes any kind of relationship. And if you feel like you're kind of avoiding becoming a bit more independent because you know that some sort of chaos or something is going to happen between your parents and yourself, maybe it's time to just kind of like jump into it and see what happens and see if you can navigate that chaos and that conflict within that relationship in a healthy and mature way. Just because there's conflict doesn't mean your relationship with your parents is going to end, is basically what I'm trying to say. And maybe you detaching and being a bit more independent is going to create some conflict, and that's okay, that's normal, that's kind of how it should be. Like I was saying earlier, humans are messy, relationships are messy, and they're not going to be this smooth, stable thing. That's just not how it's going to be all the time. It's not realistic. And if you want to create change for yourself, and if you want to continue the flow of movement in your life, change is going to happen. Sometimes change creates chaos, and that's just a truth. And it's an opportunity to kind of strengthen that skill of conflict management and how you can kind of navigate whatever the disagreement is in a healthy way. So yeah, that's some thoughts on just, I guess, detaching from your parents and like starting to kind of go in your own way in general. But I think that's everything I kind of want to say about this topic. As always, I would love to hear your own thoughts on people pleasing in general. Make sure you're following me over my Instagram, sammi.quinn. That's where I take submissions, so if you have any reflections of an internal experience that you feel alone in, I would love to hear. And I would just love to hear any feedback you have about the podcast in general. I hope you guys have been enjoying it so far. I've been having a lot of fun making these and getting the opportunity to talk to a few of you guys, so it's been fun. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye.